Welcome to Dedicated. I'm your host, Doug Brunt. Today, it is my pleasure to be with Erik Larson. He is a journalist and best-selling author, probably the most successful author of narrative nonfiction of our time. He is famous around the world for his titles including The Devil in the White City, Dead Wake, Splendid in the Vile, and his latest is The Demon of Unrest, which is equally fantastic. He's one of only a handful of authors for whom I automatically pre-order the book. I don't need to know anything about the book other than he wrote it. Erik, it's great to be with you today. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I'm so glad you pre-ordered the book. That means a lot.
It's you, Amor Tolls, who we were just talking about, and it might be only you two, actually, that I pre-order automatically for every time.
That's great. That's great.
So I love the cocktail choice today. So we've got the Manhattan, which is my favorite.
Mine too.
And I generally make it with rye, as you can see.
Excellent.
So I'll get that started.
I like the sound effects, the cork coming off, the gurgle, gurgle, gurgle of the bottle.
I think we were talking about...
That's my favorite vermouth as well. Good for you.
Good.
Yeah.
And I kind of do it all freehand here, just eyeing it up.
I love it. Now, are you going to have one also?
Oh, yeah. How about the cherry? Are you good with the Luxardo?
I'm fine with or without.
Okay.
Yeah.
You are.
If my wife were here, she would want two in the glass, and then she would for sure have one.
Okay, well, so we'll double up on the cherry then.
She's not here, though. Thank you. Wow. Very.
These are the good, like the brandied good cherries.
I love them. Yeah. This is a high class bar. You have. Do you have a happy hour or no? No.
You know, I kind of sneak the booze around the hallways here. I'm not sure we're really supposed to be doing this.
All the better.
But they are allowing it for now.
Good.
All right, we'll pour this out.
Yeah, this is great. So fun. This is exactly what I need at the end of today.
All right, this is a good way to kick off the book tour. I just saw online you're going to do. You've got a big book tour coming up.
Yeah, it's coming up starting on Sunday. Not Sunday. Starting on April 30th down the road. So it'll be basically Tuesday. Yeah, Tuesday.
Right, well, cheers to no interruptions from
clink
from pandemics while you're on tour this time. I know you're saying with your last one.
Very nice drink.
Good. Splendid in the Vile. Your book tour got clipped a little bit with the COVID outbreak.
Cut in half. Cut in half. But it ended in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was going to be interviewed by the mayor there, G.T. Bine, cool guy. And we did a live stream, and it worked out fine. But I'm going back to Tulsa on this trip to sort of reprise what was lost. So
all right, well, Tulsa, get ready. Here comes Erik Larson.
Yeah, coming.
So you are originally a New Yorker guy, born in Brooklyn and
very much,
raised in Long Island?
Born in Brooklyn, lived there probably all of 2 years, and my family moved to Long Island. Yeah, but my father remained. He was a professor of speech and theater at Brooklyn College.
Okay.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah.
And then you went to UPenn undergrad.
University of Pennsylvania undergrad. Yep, went there because my high school girlfriend went there, and then we broke up 2 weeks after we got there.
And then just awkwardly passed each other on campus?
Very awkwardly passed each other on campus, yeah.
And I read that you studied Russian history in undergrad. Is that right?
Yeah. Freshman year, I took a Russian history course with the best professor on the planet. Unfortunately, he's passed away, but Professor Ryazanovsky, and he was just a spellbinding lecturer. And I fell in love with Russian history. I started taking Russian, intensive Russian, reading Russian literature, and crafted my own major, Russian history and culture. And that was it. And have I done anything with it? No. I
was just going to say, there is not yet a Larson book tackling topics in Russia.
Do you know what? There are so many topics in old Russian history that I would love to do, but obviously for various reasons it's not that easy to do, to say nothing of the fact that I am not one of those people who has a gift for language. I mean, I studied Russian for like 4 years, every day, 5 days a week with a cohort of really great friends. I can't remember a thing.
So digging through the archives would be a challenge.
I can say "Я вас люблю," which means I love you. So
yelling after your girlfriend, ex-girlfriend at Penn.
Yeah, it didn't work.
I was coming in on the train today, and reading my notes about this and coming across, my notes that I'd already written about your background in Russian history. I was thinking, my God, he's got to do like the night of Rasputin's murder or something. That would be an incredible 12-hour period.
No, Rasputin is a great subject. I mean, I love that stuff. But again, I'd have to have, I don't want to have to rely on a translator or an assistant. I want to be able to just get in there. However, I would say this, that on my bucket list, I've thought about doing a book about War and Peace, about the experience of reading it in the original Russian. Something I'm going to try to do.
So not about how Tolstoy wrote it, but about how the first audience was reading it?
No, how I read it. How I went about trying to, learn to read the
so as you were studying Russian language, that's what you get.
And then sort of go to the
right into the deep end.
Go to the various places, the experience of reading War and Peace, those great oak tree scenes and all that stuff, and try and just capture that in a book. I'm not going to do it, but it's nice. It's nice to have it on a bucket list.
Yeah. So from Penn undergrad, you go to Columbia Journalism for a master's?
Columbia Graduate School of Journalism, yes. Although there was an interval where I actually worked for a publisher for about a year, Grasset & Dunlap. And then I made the mistake of going to see the film All the President's Men. And I was transfixed. I said, that's what I want to do. I want to bring down a president. And so I applied to one journalism school with the idea that if I got in, I'd go. And that was Columbia, and I went.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was a great experience.
That is a great book, and we also have the vintage movie poster of All the President's Men hanging in our house.
Yeah,
it's just an incredible film. I can see why that connected. I don't know if you connected with the book or the movie first, but
actually, it was the movie first, and then I read the book secondarily. And the book is really great, very suspenseful book. But, the movie was, who couldn't get caught up in all that? Redford
and Hoffman.
It's like, oh my God!
And who played the Washington Post guy? It was like an amazing cast.
I'm blocking on that, but it's funny. There was an article in the Atlantic Monthly. I remember about a couple of months after that film came out, and it had on the cover it had Hoffman and Redford. And it had a cartoon bubble and said, do you know how many people now are applying to journalism school because of this movie, because of us?
Oh, that's interesting. That's so funny.
And I guess it's a surf fight of people going into journalism. Yeah.
Wow.
And I was one of them.
So when you went into journalism school then, did you, now you've been doing it for years from different angles. You've been at small papers and you've done other things, written for all sorts of things. Looking back, does journalism school teach you something valuable that's not attainable by just on-the-job training, which I think might be even better?
Oh, I think everything that I learned would be attainable in terms of on-the-job training. But for me, it was immensely valuable because, it just sort of jump-started my journalistic skills. I mean, there were people in my class who had actually worked for small newspapers already. And I found myself wondering, why are they here?
Who then went back to school. Yeah.
Who then went back to school. Now, what's also very important about...
You need a calling card maybe. Like, I went to Columbia, so that gets you the interview or something.
True. I mean, if you're competing with 5 other people for a job at a relatively small newspaper somewhere in a flyover country, right? And you have this degree and otherwise everything checks out. Everybody's equal. Maybe you'll get that job because of that. I don't know. But I loved it. I met some great people, had a great time. And very importantly, what you learn in J school, you learn ethics. You learn a code of ethics. It was asserted from the get-go things that you could do and could not do.
Like a respect for journalistic integrity.
Respect for journalistic integrity, yeah.
It seems like a lost art, actually, these days. But.
Well, yes and no. I mean, eventually I wound up at the Wall Street Journal. And boy, talk about a code of ethics at the Journal. I mean, man, if somebody took you out to lunch, and it cost more than X amount, you had to pay. You couldn't.
No gifts can be received over like $50 or maybe it was less than or something, right?
Yeah, we weren't even allowed to sign non-disclosure agreements. You said, look, I interview you, and that's the way it goes. I'm not going to sign that. So really gave me a terrific compass.
Yeah. And then you also, I know you worked in Bucks County at one of the small, which is actually fairly near where I grew up.
Really?
But you're one of a number of folks who've come on this show who did have a stint at a small paper. I think Jess Walter worked at a small paper. I'm trying to think. The guy Keith O'Brien, who just wrote the Charlie Hustle biography. was at small papers for a while, and you really, you're on deadline. You got a word count. It hones your chops as a real writer.
It would, except that my job at my first newspaper, the Bucks County Courier-Times, which, boy, that was a great place to start. I worked for the Sunday paper, and my obligation was each week to produce something called the Sunday Special, which was a full-page story about something. So I was doing long-form journalism before long-form became a thing,
Mm-hmm.
And that was so valuable, so valuable for me, as was, frankly, the fact that the other duty that I had in addition to doing that is that on Saturday nights I covered the cops. That was a mix of just great fun and real sorrow, every Saturday.
Would you doing ride-alongs and things like that?
No, just covering the cops, like what was happening throughout Bucks County. And, every Saturday night, it seemed to me some poor kid was killed in a car crash, and I had to call the parents,
You would call the parents?
Yeah. Not to notify them. I would call them to ask about the accident.
Yeah.
And I found it was very, very important to me because I found that parents really wanted to talk about it. They really wanted to talk about their kid. Although there was one time when, unfortunately, I was the first caller, so that was hard.
It feels like local news doesn't happen quite as much in that way these days as it used to. Sort of the metro section of the Times isn't what it used to be. Or I'm not sure it even exists anymore.
I don't think there's.
Did they get rid of it? Yeah.
Well, no, is there a metro? Yeah, there is. There is still a metro. There is. Although I don't know if that is something that is provided to people who live outside Manhattan. I don't know, but I get it. I mean, I'm still a major consumer of the Sunday New York Times. I mean, that's been entrenched in my Sunday morning custom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we still get the paper delivered. Actually 7 days we get the paper.
We get the paper delivered. I love it.
Yeah.
It's just anyway.
There's something about random discovery. I think I read an article just discussing that very thing. You leaf through it.
Yes.
It's it's targeted when you go online. Like I have searched for this, and you find the thing you're looking for. But when you thumb through the paper, random things come along to you.
Absolutely.
You weren't anticipating.
It's something I think and actually talk a lot about. I call it the serendipity effect. It is that you don't know what you're going to come across, and suddenly you see it. And it's like, wow, that's interesting. It's the same thing. It's the same phenomenon as when you go to an open stack library, where you can just walk among the books. If you're looking for book X and you come to that point on the shelf, you can find that book, but there's a whole bunch of other books around it that are either directly or tangentially related to it, because that's how the Dewey Decimal System works.
Yeah,
and you never know what you're going to find. I mean, the reason my book Isaac Storm exists is because of an accident like that, and I'm all for it.
How do you select the books that you read? Because I'm sure you read a ton for research of your next book. You probably have a stack of people asking for blurbs. And then what else do you read?
I do have a stack of people asking for blurbs, and I'm not a good blurber. I do it very, 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 very rarely. But you're asking how I come up with the ideas.
How do you just with what you read for pleasure?
Oh, what do I read for pleasure?
Like in terms of discovering something in the library stacks.
So during the day, I read. As part of my research or in researching potential future ideas, I just read nonfiction. That's all I read, and most of it is really awful. Seriously, really tedious. I mean, I'm talking
like from an academic press. It's
I'm talking about monographs and so forth. But those things so often provide you those little gems.
Mm-hmm.
If you spend 3 hours reading some 100-page monograph, let's say from University of Nebraska has a very active history department. They do a lot of very, very good stuff. If you read it, if you spend 3 hours reading this thing and you come away, if I come away with some fact that is just like magical, I'm happy.
It's worth it. Yeah.
I'm absolutely happy. And in fact, Devil in White City, it's probably my best known book, got started because of that very thing. I was reading an incredibly boring monograph about the World's Fair of 1893. Clearly, this person was looking for tenure, and it was just so tedious. It should have killed the book right there. But I know from experience that you should always look at the footnotes, right? I went to the footnotes in this thing, and that's where this poor author let herself go. She couldn't get the stuff into the monograph because I don't know what she was striving for. It probably was, in fact, tenure. Maybe it was a PhD thesis. But there in the footnotes were things that I just was fascinated by. For example, I'm a big fan of juicy fruit gum. And one of the footnotes was about how juicy fruit gum was introduced to America at the World's Fair of 1893. And I was like, what? This is my favorite gum. It was 100 years old. And then as I went through the footnotes, more and more stuff. Who came to the fair? The fact that Cracker Jack was introduced at the fair. And
something like 100 plus things came to that fair, including the Ferris wheel, as you point out in your book.
I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah.
And I certainly didn't know the Ferris wheel was named for George Washington Gale Ferris. And I thought Ferris was iron, Ferrous. But so that's what led me to think, oh man, that's what the story is. I already knew about the killer. I didn't want to write about him because I didn't want to do crime porn. But suddenly I'm reading about this World's Fair, and within 24 hours I had my title, Devil in the White City, juxtaposition of good and evil, So that's how that came about.
I love the way you put that too, by the way, that she let herself go in the footnotes, because so many writers do feel pressure to stay within the structure and the sort of architecture of what they're doing. And of course, it does have to be sourced and noted, and there's pressure to get it all right. Then you do a footnote where it's like, I'm going to step out of that for a minute. I'm going to give you a little tasty nugget that I love. Doesn't quite fit in the structure, but I love it. And that's when they riff and their writing becomes almost better.
I do that all the time. I mean, I always salt my footnotes with stories, because there is a cadre of really disturbed fans who love footnotes, Semper Fi, right? And so I provide these little stories to them. And it also helps me. I mean, I know I've got this great story. It's not going to fit in the main narrative. I don't want to just dump it. I'm going to put it in the story. So,
just on my last book, I love that, and I'm now realizing, like, maybe subconsciously I got it from you, but I had so many footnotes in the first draft of my last book. There was something like 200. My editors were like, "This is insane. Either they need to go in the text, or they need to go away and save only the most precious." So I did manage to save them, but there's still a ton of footnotes in my book, and each one, my sort of bar was, it has to be a treasure. You're going to take your eyes out of here. Right. And you got to go down to the bottom of the page to read it, and then come back up, and that's annoying. Well, but it has to be worth it. So you have to make it worth it.
Well, in addition to the citations, you got to have the citations if you're going to quote stuff. So you've got to have that. But so you're saying you like to throw in like that many stories, 250 stories?
Well, no. Well, yes. If I had, I recognize
that's
it
a
had
lot of
to
stories.
Be brought back. So it ended up being like 80 in the end. Over 400 pages. So to my editor's credit, he reined me in, because several then sort of went into the text. It was too many, but I did love it. And then I got feedback from a lot of writers like, these footnotes are fun. They're
people enjoy them. People enjoy them. I enjoy writing them, and I enjoy providing it to my readers. It's fun.
So let's talk about a few of the books then. So your first book, as you kind of referenced there, Naked Consumer in '92. Your first two were really more issue books, as opposed to what you've become known for in the narrative nonfiction world.
Yeah, they were more journalistic. The first was a series of basically essays talking about that central core subject of how companies spy on individual consumers. And I mean, I loved doing those essays, and I thought some of them were really terrific. But like any writer of the first book, I was like, this was not promoted well. The whole thing.
Who was your publisher on the first one?
Yeah, we'll keep that to ourselves.
Okay.
But I got the bug, man. It suited my pace. It suited my life. I had at that point.
So you were moonlighting with this book. You were working at a paper at that time, I guess. Were you at a journal then?
No, I was doing mainstream. Well, I had left the journal, and I was doing mainstream freelancing for like the Atlantic and Harper's and so forth. And what had happened is I had come.
Sorry, quick tangent. Are you paid by the word as you're doing that sort of thing?
For the Atlantic and so forth?
Yeah.
No, I wasn't paid for the word. The New Yorker does that, or used to do that. I was paid. We'd agree on a fee for the project, and I would just do it. But what I found was that doing these pieces, I spent so much time, did so much research, that I might as well write a book. I had all these stacks of notes and everything, and so that's when I decided, okay, I'm gonna do this first book. And again, I loved it. The second book America's gun culture through the eyes of through the story of a particular model, not a single gun, but a model of handgun that had been initially designed for use, if you can believe it, in street combat in Cuba. That was the point. It was in Havana.
That's a niche.
Yeah, that's a niche. And then evolved from there into a consumer product that was actually given away free in a monthly lottery by the manufacturer. And this became a favored gun back in the day of drive-by shootings in Baltimore, where I was living at the time.
So it was like a semi-automatic type of thing where you could you could rip off a number of rounds as you're driving by.
Designed initially as an automatic weapon, but because you can't sell those thanks to the National Firearms Act, God bless them, it was a semi-automatic. But you could still really wail with it if you wanted to, except that this gun, thank God, had a proclivity toward misfiring. For malfunctioning. And that's what sort of saved the day in the school shooting that I was writing about. He killed his teacher, but nobody else died.
And this was 94. This was Lethal Passage in 1994.
Wow, you've got the dates. Yeah, thank you.
I did.
But, yeah. But no, so and that.
Yeah, feel free to drink up. I've got all the stats here.
I'm working. So that was the Lethal Passage was my first. It began to show the glimmer of narrative. Because I was following this model of handgun through this shooting in Virginia Beach and all the other forces that came to bear. I mean, I learned to shoot. I mean, I actually have nothing against guns. I mean, I loved learning to shoot, and I was pretty good with a .38 revolver. Very good, actually.
It's incredible to go to the handgun range. I've done that.
Yeah.
It's one thing. I've done the shotguns doing the skeet shooting at the clay pigeons. There's something totally different somehow for me of shooting the handgun. It just the noise and the power right near it. It was crazy.
Yeah. Well, and now you put yourself in this situation where I learned to shoot. I took a gun safety course. Well, actually, a safety course that was designed for women. How to protect themselves using firearms. So there I am. There are, I think, 10 women, and there's me. And they're all shooting at this male target and just celebrating. And I'm like, okay, easy now.
Was it it wasn't just the normal paper sort of outline black and white target? It was like an actual color photo of a male?
No. It was a paper target, but they were shooting low, And then we learned, I learned how to this, one thing this instructor taught is if you're really in a pinch and you're on the ground, and you get your gun out and you shoot between your legs at your offender. How to do that. And boy, these women were really into that. They
leaned in.
I tell you.
Oh boy.
Yeah, but that was a very eye-opening story, and it became it's sort of a quasi-narrative. I would say it's 3/4 narrative, and the rest sort of expository journalism.
Okay, so that begins your sort of narrative spine for these books, and because your third book then is Isaac Storm, which is now you're sort of in the historical narrative nonfiction that you
squarely in the historical narrative genre, and it's interesting how that came about because this goes 1994. I had read a book called The Alienist by
Caleb Carr. Yeah,
great book, novel, serial killer in old New York.
I mean, novel, but I think deeply researched. I mean, it was a really terrific novel.
That's what I'm getting to. Is that it left me with such a feeling for old New York, right? And so I decided, okay, I'm gonna do a real life murder, a book about real life murder, distinction there, and see if I can capture the same effect. So I started researching murders. I went to the library, my Suzalo Library in Seattle, where I was living at the time. And sausage being made here, I took out a book called The Encyclopedia of Murder. Started reading it. I can't remember where I came across the killer who eventually is wound up as a secondary narrative in Devil in White City. It was either under Holmes or Mudgett. Read about him, was not interested. I did not want to do something so over the top. I mean, the guy had acid vats and so forth. I didn't want that. I wanted to do something more along the lines of Gosford Park, that kind of thing.
A happy killer.
A happy killer story. A tasteful killer. Exactly, a tasteful killer. And so I started looking into a murder actually in Houston, and it was when I was doing that I stumbled across a headline in the New York World from 1900, which said, hurricane strikes Galveston, 2,000 dead. Right now, growing up on Long Island, I was a hurricane junkie. I love hate. I mean, we lived in a very modernistic glass house surrounded by very tall trees, and these tall trees were sort of my friends, and I would track the hurricanes at WGBB radio, throughout from the origins on to when they arrived. But I had nothing.
And high winds, you're thinking friend or foe, like it's just gonna.
But I knew nothing about this hurricane, that hit Galveston, Texas, and killed 2,000 people. Now, it turns out that 2,000 was a gross underestimate of how many people were killed. It's like 10% of what the total death toll for the Texas coast was. But wow, I was like, okay, forget the murder. And again, this is also the origin story for Devil in the White City. And so put that all aside. I'm going to do this hurricane. How do you do it? How do you write about a hurricane? My original approach was very straightforward, journalistic, and I sent that book proposal to my agent, and he's like, "No, this is not what you want to do. You need a character. You need somebody to tell this story through." And I was like, "Okay, I get that. Yeah, somebody to hold hands with, whatever." And so I started doing a whole lot more research. Sent another book proposal. He said, "No, you're not there yet." I think I sent him, in the end, 9 book proposals.
Are you still with the same agent, by the way?
Yes.
Because he sounds like he's that's a involved and I don't know, wise agent.
I was ready to dump him, and he knows it. He knows it. He sensed it. And he said, "Okay, I think we're ready to go." But here's what happened. I was doing more and more research into hurricanes. I went down to the NOAA library in Sweetland, Maryland. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. To their library.
NOAA.
Yes, NOAA.
Yeah.
And that's where, back to the serendipity effect. Sitting at my desk, going through hurricane things, and I looked down a row of books, and I saw a leather binder protruding from this wall of books, protruding about this far out. And I was, I felt I needed to take a break, so I walked down that aisle of books, pulled out this binder. And this, by the way, is a library that has boxes of notes from the handwritten original notes from various polar expeditions from the early 20th century, late 19th. So I pull out this binder, and in that binder, in that leather binder, there is one newspaper article, a single newspaper article from the Galveston, I can't remember what the paper's called, Tribune, let's say. And the article was by a man named Isaac Klein, the chief weatherman for Texas in that era. And in that article, he wrote emphatically that no hurricane could ever do serious damage to the city of Galveston.
Oh my gosh.
And suddenly the legend of Isaac Klein fractured. He was known through history to be the guy who saved the day. And in fact, he had no clue what was going on, and he did not save the day at great cost to himself. Mm-hmm. And so I started focusing on Isaac Klein, talk about his life, his experience as a weather guy, which at the time was high end, absolutely, leading edge science, believe it or not. And so I focused on him, his life, his story, and juxtaposed against this hurricane.
And the time is like, this is a 1900 storm? 1900, right? Yeah.
And so I'm going back into his past, like 20 years earlier, 30 years earlier. Meanwhile, while I'm talking about him, I'm also tracking this hurricane across the ocean as it's approaching Galveston, and sort of the start of my sort of dual narrative sort of thing. Yeah. And my agent finally said, "Okay, yeah, this is going to work. This you should do." So I credit my agent. Really, we well, I was going to say we cannot tell him this, but he knows. And he will know now.
Yeah, he's probably at every dinner party taking credit.
But he deserves a lot of credit for making me look at stories. I say stories, I mean historical narrative, fact narrative.
Yeah.
Differently than I had looked at things before.
Well, you mentioned the dual narrative there as you're talking about Isaac and Galveston and the storm coming across, and then the two meet. I see that repeating in your work, for example, and I think the best example is Dead Wake, where you've got, this is a story about the German U-boat that sinks the Lusitania.
Yeah.
You have beautiful access to intimate accounts of people both in that U-boat and people, of course, on the Lusitania.
Yeah.
And you toggle between the two as they get closer and closer and closer across the Atlantic and from Western Europe. And then, of course, we all know they meet, but the tension of the whole thing is almost all the more because we know they eventually meet.
Exactly. Excellent. I'm so glad you hit that, because that is one of those rare cases where knowing the ending is a benefit, right? Because, the course of the Lusitania was well known, right? The log was well kept, the submarine, how do I track that? I found myself during an exploratory research trip going to the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. They have a Lusitania archive. And while I was going through that material, I came across the war log of the submarine commander. Oh my God, died and gone to heaven. It's not like a log kept by a U.S. Navy ship in World War II. Those are very spare wind, longitude, latitude, temperature, all that stuff. This was a narrative because the guy was so damn bored, with this patrol. It was a mix of boredom and sheer terror, throughout this journey up to the Irish Sea. So when I came across this, and I could plot exactly where he was. I mean, if you plug in latitude and longitude on Google, you go right there to the spot in the ocean, right? And so I was thinking, wow, I know exactly where this submarine is going to be. This submarine commander is really kind of a cool guy. I had hoped for somebody who had like a scar and was an evil character, but he was the nicest guy. At one point, they had puppies on board the submarine, right? And so this ship's log told me exactly where the submarine was. We knew where the Lusitania was, and that's the nature of suspense.
Yeah,
it's just like, it's like classic horror film. You hear a growling down in the basement. You don't go in the basement, but they go in the basement anyway, right? So
I've got a raft of questions about your process, but before we get into that, I got a couple others. One is about your lifestyle. And so we talked about Isaac Storm. That hit in 99. Devil in the White City was 2002. So Isaac Storm is a terrific book. But somehow Devil in the White City connected. I mean, that's the first time I came across you in 2002.
Yeah. Yeah.
By the way, I know you mentioned The Alienist by Caleb Carr, and I remember when that came out and I was reading it. It was kind of a hot novel. It's like, my God, that's more than 20 years ago. I don't know if you're having moments like Devil in the White City was more than 20 years ago.
Oh, I am. That came out in 2003.
Yeah. So I had 2002 in my notes, but I had 2003, whatever. But how did your life change? Because that thing just, went to the moon.
Well, my my life changed with Isaac Storm. I mean, that was my first bestseller, and that did extremely well. And that gave me the freedom to just write.
So, this is my new thing.
I didn't have to do anything else if I didn't want to.
By the way, I'm enjoying this so much.
You finish that. I have to go back by subway. But yeah, when and actually, I was in a hotel room when I learned that Isaac Storm was on the bestseller list, and the first word I got, I'm not going to trust my recollection of this, was from a political pundit who reached me in my hotel room and said, "Wow, I loved Isaac Storm." And I thought, how the hell does this guy know where I am? Why is he calling me? And then, probably a half hour later, my publicist says, "Well, you're on the bestseller list," and that changed my life.
Yeah.
Devil
What do
in
you
White
think got
City.
you on there? It's so hard to get on there. I mean, your prior to did not.
But so easy to get off. But
I assume your publisher promoted it well.
Yes.
Probably got some great reviews.
yes.
What do you think it was that propelled you onto the list, which is almost impossible for a newbie coming up?
Yeah. Well,
Did you do some TV around it?
Well, remember, this is my third book. Did I do TV? No. I don't remember doing any TV. Of course, the whole media diaspora was completely different.
Yeah.
It had a killer review from the Washington Post, which called it the what do they call it, the jaws of hurricane novels or something like that, the jaws of whatever, and that seemed to have a real resonance. But it struck a chord. The right season, and we actually brought it out a year before the 100th anniversary of the hurricane, because if you're doing an anniversary book, you're very vulnerable to competition. So we wanted to bring it out first. Paperback came out on the day of the prior
anniversary. Yeah.
So I can't really. I don't know what's in the mix. What's the special sauce? I don't know. Luck.
Yeah.
Probably
It
sheer
struck a
luck.
chord somehow.
Well, you know what it's like. I mean, And so, but Devil in the White City. I am not joking that by the time I was done with Devil in the White City, you could ask my wife if she were sitting here with us. She would actually love to have this Manhattan, but she it sounds like she's dead, but she's very much alive. But she will attest to this, that on the eve of publication, I was convinced that my career was over.
On the eve of publication of Devil in the White City?
Yes, no joke. I was convinced my career was over.
You thought the nonfiction book was going to fall flat somehow?
I thought the book was going to be torn to shreds by reviewers
because the murder was too grisly, or what?
No, not at all, because it had two narratives, two real distinct narratives that never actually touched except at one small point toward the end. Mm-hmm. I thought I was going to be just torn to shred by reviewers. And I remember, though, the same Janet Maslin, who had condemned my Thunderstruck as this flimsy mess, wrote this incredibly glowing review. I don't read my reviews. I read that one review about Thunderstruck, and I vowed after that never again.
Oh, you're a stronger man than I am. I read all of them, and I believe only the worst ones.
Unfortunately, that's what I would do. But I'm so bad that even if it's a glowing review, but there's some reference in there that's off, that's what I remember.
Yeah.
But a friend of mine called me, and this is, as you know, your friends will always tell you, even if you don't read reviews, your friends will always tell you, whether it's good or bad. They still feel like they want to tell you. And so this friend of mine called me and said, "Have you read your review in the Times?" I said, "No, I don't read reviews." She said, "Yeah, but you should read this one. Your mother could have written it."
Then you'll read it. Then it's good.
And it did perplex me, as you say. It connected, and I was perplexed for much of the journey. And when I got to Chicago, oh my God, it just exploded. I mean, Chicagoans love their history. It was.
And for audience, the World's Fair of
1893 was in Chicago.
Yeah,
the Chicago World's Fair. So, see, arrogant me. I'm assuming everybody knows the book.
Well, I probably everyone does. This is clueless me informing people of what they already know.
I should never make that decision. But anyway, what I remember vividly. Well, I remember a couple of things vividly from the book tour that took me through Chicago. I had a lot of book events in Chicago. And one was at the Chicago Club. It came to the question and answer period. And remember, I will never forget this. This woman got up, and I swear she was near tears. And she said, when I finished this book, I didn't want to come back. And I was like, yeah, I didn't necessarily want to know where she'd been. But I mean, that's exactly what I strive for. Somebody who sinks into the past so deeply that they sort of mourn having to leave the book. So it was great. The other element of that was, I think there were something like, I did one major talk. Weirdly, that book launched in New York, but go figure. But I did this major talk at the University of Chicago, and this guy gets up, question and answer period, and he says, So I got a question for you. It's just, Chicago gets the World's Fair. New York doesn't. Washington doesn't. Who put in the fix, right? And I laughed. The whole audience laughed, but they were laughing harder than I was. Mm-hmm. And I was like, right? What's going on? I asked the guy next to me. Oh, he's the alderman for Hyde Park. Who put in the fix, So but it was also the case that at that same talk, a bunch of homicide cops from the Chicago Police Department independently came to the talk and wanted their book signed. So I thought, wow, cool. Now, they may have been investigating me, thinking that I did some primary research.
Back to your roots of covering the beat.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you briefly about titles, because just to review some of the titles are great. Dead Wake, In the Garden of Beasts, Thunderstruck. They're terrific titles. And in my experience, I've had a different experience arriving at the final title of my book. In terms of either who came up with the title or at what point in the process I, or in one case, someone else, came up with the title. So how has it been for you? Because the titles are terrific.
I always come up with the titles in the end. And it's, I don't know, it's a combination of luck and, I'm obsessive when I'm looking for a title. I keep an idea journal. I keep a title journal. Same thing. And page after page of title, page after page, page after page, page after page.
So you might have hundreds of options for each book, and then
hundreds of titles, and it gradually it resolves. It's like, oh yeah, but sometimes it's immediate. Devil in the White City, within 24 hours, I knew.
Yeah.
In the Garden of Beasts, knew that one because the Garden of Beasts was the park that the ambassador and his daughter lived on, the Tiergarten. Dead Wake was a little long in coming. We went back and forth at the marketing meetings trying to figure out what to call it. Dead Wake was always my favorite. Dead Wake being a reference to after a ship has passed and the water is sort of still roiled, that's the dead wake. Mm-hmm. That's the dead wake that remains after the ship has passed. And so I loved that. But they were a little concerned about dead, and being a downer. And I'm like look, it's a ship that's
downer doesn't
killed 1,500 people. So that one.
This one I know is a reference to a quote in the book. Someone calls this sort of period of unrest prior to the Civil War.
He refers to the demon of unrest.
We need to say, it's good to say it as much as possible during the show, the demon of unrest. The demon of unrest.
Yeah. But I think my favorite evolution of a book title was The Splendid and the Vile. Mm. There was a scene in that, again, and that book is about Winston Churchill and the first year of his prime ministry, which also coincided with the first and most important year of the German air campaign against Britain and London. It was about that first year, not Winston's first. They just happened to narratively coincide. And one day, his private secretary, John Colville, fantastic. I have to tell you about my coup with that. John Colville, his private secretary, goes to his parents' house in London. From his bedroom, as one did, watched during an air raid, just looked out over the city, and it was just so, I want to say blown away, but was so impressed by what he saw. This sable black sky, these searchlights flying, explosions in the air, and he said it was such an interesting sort of juxtaposition of splendor and human vileness. And I was like, that's it. The splendid and the vile.
Your dual narrative is back.
It's back. But anyway, so that's how that came. Yeah.
Would you be open to? Has there ever been a time when someone else came up with the title? So you've come up with all your titles, but
so far, yeah. That's been the case.
It's so funny, but I'll tell this briefly. But with my last book,
you should tell everybody what it is.
Thank you. It's The Mysterious Case of Rudolph Diesel. The Mysterious Case of Rudolph Diesel. Is the title, but when I was working on it, I'm fascinated to get your opinion on this actually, because I had a contender that I had come up with, and as my editor and I were going through it, where I was always joking, like, we're going to get a bottle of wine and we're going to sit down one night, and you and I are going to come up with a title for this book.
That is not a bad approach, by the way.
Right, or a Manhattan, whatever. And so around the time I handed in the first draft for review, I had this idea for a title. because it's about the diesel engine, and it was critical to Kaiser Wilhelm's U-boat fleet, and Churchill was building up the what became the World War I Royal Navy, and diesel was the only way to have a submarine. Plus, it did industry for everywhere, for the industrial empire. So I had this idea.
It's a great idea for a book, by the way, because, anyway, go ahead.
So Engines and Empires was the idea for the title.
Engines and Empires.
I loved it. My editor loved it. It went on the galley. So, as listeners know, that months before the publication date, we put out galleys to help educate people about the book and spread the word. So it's an advanced review copy. Engines and Empires goes out. Now, I'm out in California for a book event, and I'm just landing, and my editor calls me, and he says, "Hey, I had the sales meeting at Simon & Schuster." And the team was in there, and Jonathan Karp, the CEO of all of Simon & Schuster, is in there.
Yeah.
And he said, "Great news, like everybody loved the book. Sales and marketing loved the book. Karp loved the book. It's all good, except we might want to talk about the title." And I'm like, "We're revisiting the title now? Like galleys are already out to everybody." And he said, "Well, it's instead of Engines and Empires, we're thinking The Mysterious Case of Rudolf Diesel." I'm like, all right. And he's like, "Think about it, but you've got 48 hours to think about it." So the next day I'm at breakfast at this.
I'm surprised they gave you 48 hours.
Right, exactly, right. Everyone's like, "We got to hit the ground." So the next day I'm at breakfast at this thing with Lawrence Wright, or, as I came to know him, Larry Wright.
Right.
And he's a writer of fiction and nonfiction, New Yorker, and a person I admire.
Okay.
And so over breakfast, I tell him the story because I'm only just meeting him, but I'm stressed out about it. So I tell him the story. And he's like, "I kind of like Engines and Empires." And now I'm like, oh my God. Like, So on the one hand, I've got Lawrence Wright. Myself, I'm sort of 60-40 in that camp too. On the other hand, I've got Jonathan Karp, my CEO, and the entire sales. And in the middle is my editor saying, "You can do what you want, but it's Karp and the entire sales and marketing team that's meant to support your book launch. So, do what you want to do."
You want to have them on board. That is for sure.
Well, that's sort of
so
what
you're going to ask me my opinion.
Well, yeah, sure. Yeah. Which you like? I mean, we went with Mysterious Case of Rudolf. It worked out fine, but which do you like better?
I have to say, I like The Mysterious Case of Rudolf Diesel.
Good.
You know what I don't like about Engines and Empires? It's too broad and general. I like the focus on diesel, and the name diesel will resonate with people. And people would be thinking, diesel? There was a guy named Diesel? I mean, that's what I thought when I first came across your book. I thought, wow, I didn't know that.
All right, you and Karp, great minds.
Hey,
because that was exactly his logic. He said diesel needs to be in the top line title, and mystery needs to be in the top line title because he has this crazy disappearance. And Engines and Empires could mean anything. Who knows what they're like. You could probably get away with that because you're a star, and people have a general sense of what they're going to get, like a general understanding of what they're going to get. With me, people wouldn't know, and so the title needs to be a little bit more descriptive in a literal sense.
Well, but I think the thing about the mysterious story or
the mysterious case of Rudolf Diesel.
Mysterious case of Rudolf Diesel is that the mysterious thing is very important because suddenly you're putting this in the realm of story, where Engines and Empires is sort of in the story of in the realm of history. We're writing about the history of engines and empires and so forth. But the other isolates the story as focusing on one guy's story who clearly is important in terms of the history of the diesel engine. You don't have to have people thinking about it. And the mysterious part was sort of a brainstorm because everybody loves mystery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is why you're so good at creating titles for your own books. And I'm like, somebody please help me. Where's Jonathan Karp?
Well, I would be curious to know what your other also-rans are. I mean, coming up with a title is very, it's a very tricky thing. You got to think about so many different things. But if you think about too many, then you're just paralyzed. Yeah. At some point, you're just going to say, this is what I want to call it.
Yeah.
So let's see how it goes.
Well, this is a good bridge into your process.
Yep.
So with your books, I imagine that you're looking for specific things as you find a subject now, and you probably need to have something that's going to lend itself to a narrative, I suppose. So when you're in that phase of like the torpedo in the ocean looking to acquire a target, what are you thinking about when you think about your next topic?
Well, I have established. This is not formal, but I have basically 3 criteria whenever I'm thinking about ideas. the first and probably most important is that the idea has to have a certain amount of inherent energy. There has to be an inherent narrative arc. You know, somebody once came to me on the anniversary of the auto industry, the 100th anniversary of the auto industry, and said, "You know, it's the 100th anniversary of the auto industry. You should write about that." I'm like, "Well, what's the story? You know, where's the arc?" And so I looked first for stories that have a powerful narrative arc, like the Lusitania, case in point. You know, ship, heading toward doom, pursued by a submarine. You know, that's no brainer. But then there has to be a very deep reservoir of fine-grained primary materials, diaries, letters, telegrams, and so forth, which is one reason why, unfortunately, I will never be able to do a book about the Peloponnesian Wars, even though I would love to, because it just isn't the material.
Would it matter to you if it's been plowed a bit already? Would you say it's 5 guys have done it, but I can do it better?
Well, clearly, if I'm writing about Churchill and Lincoln, I mean,
well, didn't you access some things that had not yet been accessed before on that one?
Well, no, I will not do a story. Forgive me. I mean, that connotes fiction, but to me, it does not. To me, a story is a nonfiction story that I happen to choose. What'd you ask me?
Well, with Churchill, you had found some archival things that had not yet been.
No, what I was going to say is that I will not do a book unless I can bring something new to the party. Yeah. And it's funny, for the Churchill book, very early on, I had breakfast at the Hay Adams Hotel in Washington with the then head of the American Churchill Society. Mm-hmm. And it was really all he could do to keep himself from saying, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" This guy's the most written about figure. Yeah. But he asked it very nicely. And I said to him, it's all in the telling. It's all in the telling. And he went with that. Yeah. And what I found was that with Churchill, one of my superpower was coming to that story as a blank slate. Mm-hmm. I knew about Churchill. I'd read some about Churchill, but I was not one of his, adoring fans. I didn't know much about him. But coming to him fresh, plunging into the archives was like, oh, wow, it was revelatory. So I was able to bring things out into my story, my narrative, that maybe another scholar wouldn't, because it's too familiar. Yeah. So that's kind of my ace in the hole.
All right, and sorry to distract you, but and then there was a third thing about what you look for when you.
The third thing. Okay, let me track this. Third thing. Oh yeah, of course. The third thing is it something I feel I can live with for 3 or 4 years, and that's a very important part. Mm-hmm. I sometimes talk about the fact that choosing an idea is a lot like choosing a spouse.
Right. You're going to be with them for a while.
You're going to be with them for a while. So you better, yeah.
Speaking of duration, I had a question about...
Good on you, though, for remembering that I had 3 criteria.
I had a question for you about the duration of time you cover in these books. So Isaacson is going to do the 70 years of Leonardo da Vinci over the course of his life. With your books, Splendid and Vile is like a year. This book, Demon of Unrest, is essentially, I mean, you call back to some backstory things, but it's 5 months. Dead Wake is less than a couple weeks, So are you deliberately choosing things that are going to be condensed in time?
Yes, because I have little patience. I will never, my new maxim is never say never, because I have been on record for years saying I will never write a book about the Civil War. And now here I am. Mm-hmm. And, never say never. But let's take the case of the Civil War. I felt that with my research, the way I wanted to tell the story, I could tell it in a fresh way. Mm-hmm. This is a very different account of those 5 months than you will come across anywhere else.
It's unlike anything I've read, and I was fascinated by all of it.
I'm delighted to hear that. And it has 2 terrific villains. And that's I had the freedom to approach this without any tethers to PhD thesis, PhD review, to whatever, and just tell the story with the most interesting details that I came across and the most interesting people. And it's very unorthodox. I'm sure I will be condemned by some more orthodox Civil War historians, but that's my superpower, you know?
Well, setting time aside for a moment, how about like, you know, people write about people or events or a place. In fact, there's a British historian who's a terrific writer named Gareth Russell. I don't know if you've come across him before. We wrote about the Titanic, and he came in for a book he wrote about Hampton Court.
Hampton Court.
And so his book was really about a place.
Right.
And that was the center of the thing, was Hampton Court, 500 years at Hampton Court. And so the book was about all the people and events that sort of cascaded over it over the course of 500 years. But Hampton Court, this place, grounded the book. And I mean, I suppose in the end, all books are about people. But how do you think about it in terms of events, place, people?
Well, for me, I really like to have a prescribed period of time. You know, I was saying I will never do a biography. And the reason I won't do a biography is because nobody's life is that interesting to me that I want to spend all that time trying to dredge up things about what the guy did in school. You know, I mean, I don't care. What I care about is this pivotal moment in his life. And that's the pivotal moment where this narrative takes place. So I love the prescribed period, you know, In the Garden of Beasts, 1933-34, America's first ambassador to Nazi Germany. It's that period, crucial in the history of the world, you know, although nobody knew it at the time. And so I love that tight focus. I think of it as thin slice history. You know, you think about biologists who do thin slices of
the cross section.
And that's what I do. Thin slice history.
How do you organize the research? And this actually gets back to the, you know, what we were talking about just off air before. I'm in a book club, and you were kind enough during COVID to zoom into our book club to talk about The Splendid and the Vile, which we had chosen, and you shared something on that Zoom that you were in some archives, and one of the things you do is take photographs of what you find in there, and then after you've got a room full of, you know, these photographs sort of sorted around of things you found in there. But how do you organize research and sort of prep yourself? Yeah,
so again, you know, I love archives, and typically when I start a book, I jump right away into an archive. I think of it as like parachuting in right away. I could not do that with the Demon of Unrest because of the pandemic, but I dive in right away. And I am being absolutely honest with you, is that when I'm doing this research, I don't know what I'm looking for, but I know when I find it. I know when I find it. That's why I will never employ a researcher, because I know when I find it. And then, you know, then you go down various rabbit holes. Rabbit holes are what I do. I love rabbit holes. You know, the deeper and more obscure the rabbit hole, the better for me, as long as I eventually emerge, you know, at the other end. But so I go, let's take the case of Splendid and Vile, National Archives of the UK, fabulous place. You know, you put in your requests, your material arrives at your desk, and you're among other researchers, people who are going through Elizabethan archives, people who are going through this, that, and the other thing. Stuff arrives at your desk. And there's a guy, actually, who patrols and makes sure that you're doing this right. That if you're looking at photographs, you have gloves and all that stuff. It's very, very, very precise. So these things come out, and to me, it's like Christmas. You know, I don't know what's going to come. And then suddenly this thing. One of my favorite things with Dead Wake was when I put in the request for the German code book that...
By the way, are you known in these places now?
No.
Like, is some archives like, oh my God, Erik Larson is here. He's researching a book. This is cool.
No, because one thing that I really try to do is keep a very low profile. Maybe for better or worse. I don't set things up in advance. I don't want the attention. I don't want people skewing my research. I don't want somebody saying, oh, here, let me curate what you're going to look at. You will love this, right?
Oh, right.
I just want to get my own stuff. So back to this thing for dead wake. So I put in this request for this code book that proved to be very valuable to British intelligence in terms of tracking submarines, including the submarine that sank the Lusitania. I didn't know what I was going to find. This is a code book that was actually thrown overboard from a German destroyer just before it was sunk. And so put this request. I think actually that day I went to lunch and then came back and found this thing on my desk. Box, open the box, open the paper inside, and there it is. This German code book. About 6 inches thick, the size of maybe across the top, the size of a page of sheet music, this massive code book that was actually in the hands of some German sailor.
Sub-commander, yeah.
The German sailor actually threw it overboard. The sub-commander had the same code book, but this code book was from this destroyer. Okay. It's like, oh my God. And this is very important to me. Tactile contact with the past. You can know everything there is to know about the past. You can know, that something happened. But I find until I touch something, until I feel something, it's almost not real. Mm-hmm. But when I touch that code book, and I probably wasn't supposed to touch it that way, but when I
gloves.
When I touched that, actually I wasn't wearing gloves. Didn't have to. It wasn't a photograph. When I touched that code book, I swear to God, history sort of came vibrating up my arm. And it's like, yeah, wow, this really happened. And that's important.
It is amazing to get in there and see the letters that are typed. Typically, something from early 20th
you're
century
lucky, they're typed.
But then signed.
Yeah.
Or some are handwritten and so hard to read because the handwriting is horrible. But often they're typed and then personally signed. And you can see these documents. But I want to ask your thoughts about present day on this before we get into Demon of Unrest, which is next. I have a lot of questions on that, but we operate differently today. I've talked with archivists in the past, and they'll say that period of roughly 1850 to 1950, that was the golden age of letters.
Oh my God!
There's so much there. It's so rich. And you can find it all, and you can search it, and then it gets scanned.
And from 1890 on, it was the golden age of letters typed, as you noted. Prior to that, believe me, Demon of Unrest,
so much good stuff.
Hellish effort, though, in terms of interpreting handwriting.
Oh, right.
Yeah. But anyway, go ahead.
But it's there, and you can grab it, and you can see, you grab it through rubber gloves or whatever. But it's there, and people wrote it down. They wrote letters to each other. They pretty much wrote down everything, as opposed to today, when even a text message is formal communication, right, let alone email. Yep. Which almost, these days, like nothing's written down. So 50 years from now, people are going to say, what happened in the 2020s? And there's going to be nothing there.
Except the National Archives is archiving tweets.
Is that right?
Yes.
Is that legal?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Tweets are public, so they can just sort of capture it all.
Yeah.
Well, that'd be an interesting. Speaking of a slice of history, that'll be an interesting slice.
Yeah, I've thought of this. I thought about this a lot. I sort of more in the end of the keeping of really serious diaries. Although a lot of people still like to journal. But there is, for what I do, this element of suspense. If I were to, 20 years forward, I probably won't be around, but 20 years forward, if I had access to a whole body of tweets that capture this tick-tock, minute by minute, that's valuable. What if people on the Lusitania had their cell phones? Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah. I guess I just wish it were a deeper
I know.
Sense of input, because I feel like like our 4% of our craziest 4% is on Twitter for the most part. Actively.
Hey, I'm on there.
Well, you're one of the normal ones. We're on there doing some things, but most of Twitter activity.
And my Twitter fans, I have to say, I people ask me, "Oh, you're still on Twitter?" I am, because my I think of them as my family. Universally civil. Interested, engaging. And so...
it's a great way to get your news, too. I follow Reuters and CNN and Fox News, and I follow it all. And it's a great way to get many inputs. By the way, are they archiving Instagram and other things, or just Twitter at the moment?
I don't know at that depth. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. But diaries diaries were kept in much more detail. And one of the really useful things about diaries is weather. Almost invariably, diarists of the 19th century, probably because it's like anybody else, they have to start somewhere. You open a page, you think about it, you open a page, what are you going to write, you know? And so often diarists start with the weather. Rainy today, snow, this, that, and the other thing. And to me, that's gold, because I try to make sure that weather is front and center in all my books. Mm-hmm. Because you think about it, you walk out your door in the morning, maybe you're not really processing or aware of it, but front and center is weather. You know, oh God, it's cold and raw, like it is right now outside, cold and raw. And it's not really relevant to much else, but to a reader who knows that, you know, for example, on Lincoln's inauguration day, that the day became quite warm, you know, in that period, it was started out gray and whatever, it adds context. Mm-hmm. And you get that from diaries.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the Demon of Unrest.
Let's talk about the Demon of Unrest.
One of the things that you capture so well in this book is the Southern mindset of the period. It's almost magical how you pull this off on the page, because one of the things that Northerners of that time missed, and I think that many of us today struggle to understand, is that Southern mindset. You condemn slavery for what it is, and you also allow or sort of open up minds to what the Southerners were thinking, and that the slavery.
Well, no, let me stop there for a moment. I have to say that I never, as narrator of this
don't condemn. Yeah,
I never condemn. I do condemn. I loathe slavery, but it's not my place to condemn. I let the story unfold to present the views of those who were opposed to it and those who lived for it. It's not a both sides kind of thing, but I feel very strongly when I write a book that you, like screenwriters, that you need to adopt the point of view of people alive at the time.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean you should I think it's called the fallacy of imitative form. You should not try to imitate language. You should not try to fake conversations and so forth. But just let your characters view the world through your characters. Let the characters tell the story. In Dead Wake, which is about the sinking of the Lusitania, I never refer to World War I. I refer to the Great War, because
that's what it was at that time.
There hadn't been the Second World War, and that's when people started talking about the first.
Yeah, you bring us in there. Well, so that's what you're saying there is what I think came across so magically to me, because and you even get it in the time. What Northerners were missing, what we miss today, is that for the Southerners, slavery was viewed very differently. It was they viewed slavery as this beneficial institution. It was good for it held up. Slavery's been around since the beginning of man, and it held up societal order. Yep. And so when the North ascribed evil to the institution of slavery, it was less about economic threats or greed. It was an offense to their honor.
Well, yeah. So this was a very important thing that happened in this antebellum period. The world from 1800 on, the civilized world, if you will, had increasingly come to revile slavery, moving, and the North to classify slavery as an unalloyed evil. It just became more and more that the case. The abolitionists in the North, Garrison's The Liberator newspaper, and so forth. At the same time, this very interesting thing was happening in the South, which was that the so-called pro-slavery writers were writing their books and their articles that basically reassured the chivalry. That's what they call themselves, the planters, the chivalry, believe it or not. Reassured them that in fact slavery was a positive good. It was good for society. It was good for the enslaved, incredibly, right? And so you have this this divergence of the world is going in the other direction, saying slavery is awful. The Southern planter is going in the direction saying, wow, we're doing really good things for our slaves. And much better than wage slavery
they want
in the
to
North.
be enslaved, is their view.
They want to be. They were meant. That's one of they are. They were meant to be enslaved.
Yeah.
And so that's where I see that as the fundamental source of energy for the Civil War, because these Southern planters were also really, really kind of hung up on honor, personal honor.
Right.
So if you attack slavery, you're attacking them, and that's not a good thing. That's a source of not just political animus. That's a source of hatred. And in the end, what this book, I think, really is about is the various forces that coalesce to bring Americans on both sides of the Mason-Dixon line to actually be able to imagine the wholesale killing of each other. A very important step before you can have a civil war.
It's a talent as a journalist that you have that I think few have today, to be able to present that situation in a way that the reader can experience it with the sort of magic I described. Like, wow, like I think I understand the Southern mindset, like why they're, of course, it's, bizarre to think that, but you can see like, now I get what their argument is. Like before, it's like these people are just evil, but they didn't think they were evil.
Right. I mean, it's a fallacious argument, but they did not think they were evil, but they were. Right. I mean, we can say that, of course, openly now. I mean, nobody would take an alternative viewpoint, I hope. But yeah.
Well, it was presented beautifully.
Although I have to say that my favorite character, probably in the book, I did come to love Abraham Lincoln, and I came in as a skeptic. But my favorite character in the book is Mary Chestnut, who is probably the foremost female diarist of the Civil War era. I loved her. She was so forthright, so acerbic in her assessments of her friends, and so detailed in her recounting of things she saw in the world. And she was conflicted. She had grown up with slaves. She still had slaves, but like one day she encounters a woman being sold at a slave auction, and it just tore the heart out of the day for her.
You can see it's a brainwashing element. You grow up in that culture, right, and you're brainwashed. It's almost like she was like ready for the flowered van to come by and get her out of the cult. But
she may have been ready for that. I don't know.
It's just it makes me actually wonder a little about present day. So we grow up and we're like, that cheeseburger, medium rare, that sounds pretty good. And then you see some documentary about how pigs are like treated, and they're brought in the thing, and then they fire the bolt into the brain. Like the pig thing. I'm just like, no, I can't handle it. And yet I'll like still have, maybe 100 years from now, they'll look back on us like, the American South.
Who knows what they'll look back on us, and what they'll see. I mean, one example of that is, there's a great book called The Soul of an Octopus. I don't know if you've read it, but it's the book that sort of brought to the fore that how do you say it?
Octopi?
I think it's octopuses, actually, is the correct term. I know, I would have said octopi. But that they are actually emotive creatures who actually remember. And they have been known to, after a researcher has gone away and then comes back years later to, basically meet this same octopus, that they would just hug them. And so that's really hurt me because I love, octopus. So,
well, one of the other things
I'll be condemned for that, I suppose. But
well, there are a couple things I want to touch on the book too before we go to the lightning round. But one of the cool things in this book that I did not know, it's new to me. And there are a number of books on Lincoln. This isn't really a Lincoln book.
This is not
5,000 million Lincoln books.
Thank you. This is not a Lincoln book, but yes.
It's not.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was fascinating to me was that before the Civil War, this book is really pre-Civil War. It's the 5 months leading up to.
Yep.
That was a different kind of war. It was like a PR war. And so, so at stake are all these border states. Like Virginia is a big and powerful state. And the people in the North for the Union, the people in the South for secession there are only a few states on each side, and there are a number of states in play. And so everything around Fort Sumter, which sort of talking about our place, events, people, like Fort Sumter becomes sort of a character in the book. things are boiling there. But everything by Lincoln in the north and the various parties in the south, everything's treated so delicately because they're fighting a PR war over which way states like Virginia, who are they going to throw in with? Are they with the North or the South? And there are huge debates going on in each of these states.
Right.
And so what you capture so well in here is this sort of PR war before the war to sort of draw up the battle lines.
Yeah, interesting to say PR. I would never have called it that, but you're right. I mean, I get the gestalt there that, they're sort of trying to win the hearts and minds, of this thing. And I found that fascinating as well. Lincoln was really walking a very fine line. I mean, put yourself in Lincoln's position. He's inaugurated on March 4th. The very next morning, on his desk is this note from Major Anderson at Fort Sumter saying that he can't hold out basically much longer, that this is a crisis. Mm-hmm. First day on the job, he is confronting what ultimately becomes America's greatest tragedy. 750,000 people dead. But nobody knew that at the time. Nobody could really envision that kind of wholesale slaughter. For one reason, we hadn't engaged in that kind of warfare. Yeah, by the time we came to World War I and World War II, we had. But at that point, we had not. We had like the Mexican War and yes, the American Revolution, but that was sort of a war of isolated battles and so forth. But so suddenly you have this, the situation where something is looming, but you don't know what that thing is, and you are the president of the United States. People revile you. People love you. What do you do? That's the quandary. And he negotiated it as best I think anybody can, but the outcome was pretty horrific.
Well, it was interesting to see the constraints because you have all the details. You have the letters and notes of meetings between people as they're weighing these constraints of what can we do? Like, this is what we'd like to do, but if we do that, Virginia's going to do this terrible thing and it's not going to work out well. So we can only do so much.
Well, one of the things that got me into this book and made me decide that, maybe I can say something fresh, was a collection of documents called the Official Records of the Union and Confederate Armies. I managed to acquire during the pandemic a published volume of the Volume 1, which is the critical volume for me. It arrived at my Long Island readout, and I disinfected it and got the book out. And the thing that really drew me, this book has hundreds of documents in it, all scrupulously curated in chronological order. Telegrams, responses to telegrams, letters, responses, reports, responses. This march, it's sort of like the submarine war log, this march toward the inevitable outcome, and it's just back and forth. And also all of it couched in the most gentlemanly terms. It reminded me of the old joke about the twins who aren't born for about 2 years because they keep saying, no, after you. No, after you. This courtesy, this chivalry.
Yeah.
And remember that Major Anderson, who's a pivotal player, the U.S. Army officer in charge of Fort Sumter ultimately, and his opponent, General Beauregard, they were friends. Beauregard was a pupil of his. All their exchanges were the most friendly, honorable things. And yet here was Beauregard doing everything he could to establish all these gun batteries to assure that he would slaughter his former teacher and all his men.
And the communications are like out of a Shakespearean play or something. It's really amazing.
It was really something. I was really struck by them.
One very cool literary device in the book is that you open up various parts of the book with quotes from the etiquette of dueling.
The Code Duello,
It's so great. It's great because it parallels everything that's happening in the books. And so listeners know, of course, with a duel, there's someone who's given a perceived offense, then there's the person who issues the challenge of the duel, and they each have a second. And so there's this sort of etiquette around how you are there are obligations to try to de-escalate as you go.
Right.
and as the thing riles to the boil until ultimately shots fired. But there are ways to go about it to sort of prevent shots fired, maybe, And so you use this etiquette.
It's basically a guide to gentlemanly murder. That's what it is.
That's right. That's what you've been striving for since Devil in the White City.
Of course. No, I'm glad you pointed that out because the Code Duello is very important, I think, to the story. You know, this code that governs basically how you can murder your fellow man and feel honorable about it. Right. That's what that's about. One of my favorite details is the fact that women could not challenge you to a duel or could not be challenged to a duel, but if they insulted a man, then the woman's husband could be called to the duel.
He would be the challengee. Someone could challenge the husband.
Yes.
So the wife could just go, if she's looking for a divorce, that's a great way to go. Who's the best sharpshooter in the room, and I'm going to go insult that guy.
That would be a hell of a way for a divorce, yeah.
So one question I had for you about that is who issues the challenge of a duel is very different from who fires the first shot, of course.
Right.
So in this case of North-South, who do you think issued the challenge? Because the Fort Sumter drama is so tense. And of course, one party did fire first shots, but that's not necessarily the same as who was issuing the challenge in that particular fraught circumstance.
Oh, interesting question. Okay, so I can think of that in a couple of ways. Obviously, the South was issuing the challenge by seceding. On one level, that's the case. But when you get down to the nitty-gritty of the actual approach to Fort Sumter, I think it was Lincoln who issued the challenge. He did something very clever, or that is perceived by historians to have been very clever. He decided, okay, we are going to resupply Fort Sumter. The main thing at Fort Sumter was that they were running out of food. We're going to resupply Fort Sumter. And he notified the governor of South Carolina to that effect. He said, we will resupply the fort, and if our fleet is unmolested, if there is
I'll just interject for listeners. Fort Sumter is the Union Fort in South Carolina, Charleston Harbor.
In Charleston.
So the Union guys are in the harbor, surrounded by Confederates.
Surrounded by Confederate guns. Yeah. Huge guns, yeah. So here's Lincoln. He tells Pickens that he's going to resupply the fort, provided you don't attack our ships. Brilliant. They attacked the ships. It's the South's fault. And that's what happened. So he kind of issued the challenge. The South took it up and then got blamed for the whole thing.
Yeah. By the way, seeing Sumter written down in my notes, it's incredible what a terrible speller Lincoln was. For a lawyer and a president, he's the worst speller. It's absurd.
Oh, but I have to say, again, I came to Lincoln as an ingenue, sort of total neophyte. I was not part of the school of Lincoln hagiography. I mean, I'd read about him, knew of him, of course, great president, great inaugural speech and all this, but I was not part of that thing, and which again I think was my superpower. So I come to this, and I'm seeing that Lincoln could not spell inauguration. He couldn't spell Sumter. He kept sticking a P in there.
Yeah.
And I found that just so endearing. I really liked that aspect. I liked the aspect also of his humor. I mean, he was probably the originator of the dad joke, in some ways. But I loved his sense of humor, and I came around to really liking Lincoln in the same way that I came around to really liking Churchill.
Yeah. All right. Last question before the lightning round is what's next? So you've written a novel, which I should have mentioned earlier, but you've written one novel in 21 or 22.
Novella. Yeah. Ghost story. It was a labor of love. Audio only. Okay. Will there be more novels, more nonfiction, any book to film work that you might do? Well, ask the producers. I think just about everything I've got is under option with somebody. Everybody else I know, all my writer friends, they've got things being made, but all my stuff is just like hanging fire. I don't know, maybe the books are too complex. I don't know what it is. But so they're all under option. But my next book, I never talk about future ideas. But I will mention this. If all goes according to current plan, I will, for this next book, return to the Gilded Age.
Great.
Stay tuned.
Would you name a hemisphere?
Nope. Nope. No. So stay tuned. Stay tuned. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And that is actually my favorite era. So.
That is my favorite era too. Yeah. I love that. Okay, so on to the lightning
round. Okay, good.
I'm going to top up just a little.
I am so good. I'm so good.
Okay, good. I have to have a little for this.
I love it. This is the
Michter. So the audience knows Michter's rye. This is actually pretty good, just with an ice cube. But
I like Michter's rye.
Also makes a good Manhattan.
Yep.
So first question: favorite book as a kid?
Count of Monte Cristo.
Great.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Great book.
All right.
Yep.
Book or book? I know you're gearing up for book tour, but book or books you're reading now?
I am reading. I'm on the fourth now. The Thursday Murder Club series by Richard Osman, and I'm loving it. I did not expect to. I mean, it's basically they're detective stories, but with an underlayment of really interesting and moving. Those of you who have those of your listeners who are reading these things will get it completely. I mean, I am surprised. I love these. But prior to that, I read Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. Loved that. Mm-hmm. And actually, because of that, I'm going to do an event up in Traverse City, Michigan, because I got to see what this territory is like. You know. So that's
fun. A nice indulgence after reading dusty memoirs and archives.
I should say that all I read after 5 o'clock is fiction.
Even when you're in the process of writing and researching, you're
absolutely. I got to get away from the whole nonfiction thing. I got to lose myself in somebody else's imagination.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
that's great. Least attended. This is a show favorite. Least attended book event ever.
Coral Gables, Florida. Isaac Storm. Bookstore. The lovely couple who were the managers of this bookstore. They had gone all out. This is the last stop on that book tour. I think it was the paperback, actually. They'd gone all out, and I was in Coral Gables. I was staying at the Coral Gables Biltmore Hotel. Have you ever been there?
No.
Fabulous hotel. Shout out to the Coral Gables Biltmore. So I have one last event, and I walk into this bookstore, and they've done everything. They got the chairs out. They got pamphlets in each chair. Time for the talk comes around. Nobody showed up.
A zero.
And this is for my raging bestseller, Isaac Storm.
Yeah, you'd already been on the list
for a long time at that point. Had been on the list, and it's like, and they were so apologetic, And
so, what'd you do? Did you just go get a drink at the bar? Or
I was delighted.
Right.
I was delighted because if there had been two people there,
that's right,
I would have had to have a conversation.
This is one of Amor's lines. He goes, "A zero is so much better than a one."
Seriously, and I was able to go back to the Biltmore Hotel and have my concluding dinner in the
just
restaurant.
Toast yourself at the end of the book tour.
I had the best dinner, and I great wine. It was just a lovely evening, topped off by the fact there were two women sitting at the next table who were like, "Are you a writer?" and all this stuff. And they were so, they had been over serving themselves, and I heard them toast each other, and both glasses shattered.
Oh my God!
And these were nice Riedel glasses.
That was not their first glass of wine then.
These were nice Riedel glasses. And, the staff was so obliging. They came over and cleaned up. Then they did it again.
Oh my God.
Anyway,
you had them nervous.
So that was my
There's not, I
quasi
assume,
nightmare.
Not been a zero since that time.
No.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, now it's
happily.
like you got to pay to get in.
But as any writer will tell you, and I'm sure you feel this way, there is always that dread. You never know what's going to happen at a bookstore talk.
Yeah.
Happily, these days, more of my talks are audience in a venue, on stage, maybe with an interview or something like that. And
how much are you doing these days? I'm always curious how much, because in conversation seems to be the general format these days. Are you mostly in conversation, or just sometimes you get up and give a talk?
That seems to be the trend over. But that's what I'm doing. Like for this next book tour, 28 stops back to back, more or less. Mm-hmm. They are all going to be in conversation on stage.
Do you ever do readings? I always feel weird doing a reading.
No. I mean, I think fiction, maybe that works better. Mm-hmm. Because maybe the prose and so forth is something that's more front and center. But I don't do readings. I don't want to inflict. I often threaten to do a reading, but I don't.
Would you ever read your own audiobook?
No. I did read the source notes essay at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. Person you've written about that you'd most like to have been able to meet?
Churchill. I would like to have gone to one of his dinners at his rural estate, Chequers, and to have just shared in one of those amazing dinners with these dignitaries and so forth.
Those scenes are brilliant. He's pounding champagne and,
and he's dancing around.
Telling stories in the middle of calamity. He's like, his life is under threat, of course. Bombs could go over that very place.
Yes, and were thought to be, likely, that was thought to be likely to happen. But it would be Churchill. It would be Churchill.
Agree. He's such an interesting historical figure. All right. Moving back to this side of the Atlantic, best decade to live in America since its founding?
I think 1890 to 1900.
Why do you say that?
Because it was a period when, I'm talking about America now, by the way. It was a period when we here in America really were so full of ourselves. We believed we could do anything we wanted. We were just the cat's meow, and there in that sort of hubris, there lie the best stories. Because when you overreach, that's when good stuff happens, narratively speaking.
All right. Well, I think we might have a hint in there in terms of hemisphere. But I agree. I love that period of time. America was such an up-and-comer at that time. Europe's starting to say, like, who is this giant, well-resourced? I mean, really, America and Russia were like these vast, very well naturally resourced places.
But also, Americans typically, well, not just rich, but Americans came up with these wacky ideas that turned out to be okay. It worked.
Yeah,
we're gonna build a canal across Panama. Hey, guess what?
Yeah,
against all odds, we're gonna build a New York City subway system. Hey, guess what? So.
Let's see. Favorite few recent TV shows to recommend?
All right, two. Succession. Succession, and Only Murders in the Building.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as a resident of New York City, you can't not watch Only Murders in the Building.
I used to live right near the building that they, sort of suggest that it's all had the Beresford, I think, or not the Beresford, it's the, what's the one, 86 between
I know the
West
one
End and Broadway.
Yeah. You didn't live in the Apthorpe by any chance?
Apthorpe, that's where it is.
No. It's supposed to evoke the Apthorpe.
It's the Apthorpe sister building, though.
Yes. But I was asking you if you were living in the
Apthorpe. I was on West End in 86, but...
we once looked at a place in the Apthorpe. I would die to live there, but not really.
But it's a really wonderful neighborhood, that Upper West Side area. That show, I will say, I loved season 1.
Yep.
Are you current or all the way through?
We are on season 3. We just started season 3.
Is it holding up?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, it's holding up because Steve Martin. I was just talking to my wife this morning before we got out of bed. I said, I don't know why I was talking about this in bed, but it's like the thing hinges completely on the wonderful chemistry of Selena Gomez, Steve Martin, and Martin Short.
Yeah.
That's what makes this thing work.
I'm a huge Steve Martin fan, and yet I've only watched season 1, and yet I thought Martin Short stole the show in season 1. He was so funny, and I love their back and forth. And there's this hilarious story that, if you don't know it, you should Google it, of how Martin Short and Steve Martin first met.
I don't know it, but I'll Google.
I'll show you after.
Martin Short is fabulous, but I love Steve Martin also, and Selena Gomez. Oh my God, what a talent! Huge singing career, and she's a wonderful actress.
Yeah, she delivered. It was great.
Yeah.
All right, last question for Erik Larson. One piece of advice for the audience.
One piece of advice for the audience. I think for the writing audience, I'm going to provide you a piece of advice, and that is always stop one day's writing in the middle of a sentence.
Leave yourself a place to pick up.
Yep. I hope we can cut this, but I got to go pee.
Yeah, me too.
Let's go do it. Then we'll come back. We'll cut it.